What if the wildest science fiction was actually real? Joe Rogan has the most unbelievable scientific stories ever told. So let's listen to Brian Greene talk to Joe about the Big Bang Theory in episode 1428, Big Bang Theory. In a conversation that bends the very limits of human thought, physicist Brian Greene sits across from Joe Rogan and tackles a question most of us have whispered to ourselves late at night. What happened before the Big Bang? Greene doesn't hesitate. He presents not one, but two mind-expanding possibilities. The first paints the Big Bang not as the beginning of everything, but simply a chapter in a much older cosmic story. What if our Big Bang was just one in a series of bangs across a vast multiverse? A patch of space among infinite others, each exploding, expanding, evolving, and maybe forever. But then comes the twist. Maybe the question itself is flawed. Greene channels Stephen Hawking's famed analogy. Imagine standing at the North Pole, and if you ask, which way is north from here? The question breaks down, north doesn't exist beyond the North Pole. And similarly, if the Big Bang was the origin of time itself, then asking what came before it is like asking what's north of the North Pole, because it simply doesn't compute.
Here's the thing that I've always wanted to ask someone like you. What do you think was happening before the Big Bang?
Yeah, it's a deep question and a subtle one, and there's sort of two ways that I like to think about that question. One is it could be that the Big Bang was an interesting event, but not the first event in the totality of reality. It could have been the first event that sparked the expansion of our part of space. But it could be that there's a grander realm of space within which we sit as a small part, and that grander realm may have been there for a far longer period of time. It may have experienced its own Big Bangs, maybe a collection of Big Bangs that may extend infinitely far into the past. So it could be that the answer to the question of what happened before the Big Bang is a lot of other Big Bangs or a lot of other quantum events that were taking place in a larger landscape of reality than we have direct access to. However, another answer is that the very question may not make as much sense as the words seem to suggest. We know how to parse that sentence. We know what it means to talk about the moment before the Big Bang because we know how to talk about the moment before your birth or the moment before the Civil War or the moment before any event that happened in the world. We fully understand the meaning of that kind of sentence. But it could be that when it comes to the Big Bang, the sentence actually doesn't mean anything. It could be that the Big Bang was the place where time itself started. And Hawking himself had a wonderful analogy to get this across. He said, look, I'll dress it up a little bit. Imagine you're walking on planet Earth and you pass by someone. You say, hey, can you point me in the direction of north? I want to walk in the northward direction. They point you, continue to walk. You pass by somebody else, say, hey, which way is further north? And they point you in that direction. But when you get to the North Pole and talk to somebody there and say, hey, how do I go further north? They look at you and say, whoa, that question doesn't mean anything because this is where north begins. There's no notion of going further north than the North.
Rogan, visibly rocked, presses further. Why would time, something so constant in our lives, have a beginning at all? Greene's answer pushes the edge of comprehension. Maybe time isn't fundamental. Maybe it's like temperature, an emergent phenomenon. One molecule doesn't have a temperature. You need many moving in just the right way. Time, he suggests, could be the same. Without the right configuration of matter and energy, time as we know it might not even exist.
That freaks me out.
Yeah.
See, that's one that it gets in your head and you go, what do you mean beginning of time?
Yeah.
Why would time have a beginning?
Good. And it could be that time is an emergent quality of reality. I give you an analogy, boy. What I mean by that is we all know what temperature means intuitively. Something's hot, you feel it. Something's cold, you feel it. Your body understands those concepts. What physics has done is it's gone deeper into the concept of temperature and revealed that it is nothing but the average motion of the particles making up the environment. So if the molecules are moving really quickly, you've got a hot environment. If the molecules are really moving slowly, it's a cold environment. So temperature emerges from the motion of particles. So if you have like one particle, you can't really talk about it being hot or cold because you need a conglomerate. You need an agglomeration of particles to be able to talk about their average motion. And in that sense, temperature is this emergent idea that rests upon more fundamental ideas, the molecules and atoms that make up reality. Maybe that's true of time. Maybe time as we know it is a property that only makes sense in certain environments when there's enough stuff arranged in the right patterns. But fundamentally, maybe there are atoms or molecules of time which, when not arranged in the form that we are familiar with, don't yield time as we know it. Time itself may be a quality of the world that exists here in this environment, but doesn't even apply in other environments that are configured radically differently.
It's a very chilling and beautiful thought that time, the very canvas of our lives, is just a property of this version of reality. And elsewhere or before, there might be no ticking clock at all. Big Pharma and Rockefeller. In episode 2210 of the Joe Rogan Experience, siblings Casey and Callie Means pull back the curtain on a hidden history of America's health crisis. What sounds like conspiracy unfolds as a disturbing timeline of influence and control. They trace the origins to 1909, when John D. Rockefeller's personal lawyer authored the Flexner Report. It's a document that redefined American medical education. It dismissed nutrition, holistic healing, and the interconnectedness of the body as a pseudoscience, shaping a system built to diagnose, cut, or prescribe. That standard, astonishingly, still dominates today.
I think a lot of people listening to us years ago, it's just like, this sounds conspiratorial. And it's just like, what actually happened? And there's a couple like really important dates that happened that are historical that I think like set this structure really intentionally. The first was 1909, the Flexner Report. So literally John D. Rockefeller's personal lawyer wrote the report for Congress that basically set the standard that's the standard today for medical education. And it literally says in the binding guidelines that holistic health and nutrition and anything about interconnectedness of the body is pseudoscience. It says we need to name the condition and cut it out or prescribe it.
And what year is this?
1909.
So they're still going by the recommendations of 1909.
We still follow the Flexner Report.
Some a policy. I mean, and we could get
crazy.
to policies, but like rescinding the Flexner Report and having updated scientific education and standard of care guidelines based on what we've learned since 1909 about the majesty of the interconnectedness of our body is a really good first start, because we're binded under a law, just demonstrably, just like, again, not conspiratorial. John D. Rockefeller's personal lawyer wrote this report. Why? Because John D. Rockefeller is the father of the pharmaceutical industry and created pharmaceuticals from byproducts of oil production, and was the first investor into Johns Hopkins and other major medical schools, University of Chicago, and started the modern education program for health. There were some big issues in the health, this was the Wild West, but he created Johns Hopkins and the standard of residency training as a way to silo diseases very intentionally and then prescribe his products and interventions as the top pharmaceutical maker. And the medical schools that he created were basically a distribution system to him. Okay, so you get to World War II. Up until World War II, around that time, the 1950s, 1960s, I would argue almost any medical miracle you can think of or any listener can think of was created before that.
Well, why? Because Rockefeller didn't want just to heal, he wanted to profit. As the father of the pharmaceutical industry, he saw petroleum byproducts as the foundation of synthetic drugs. So he poured money into medical schools and research institutions. Johns Hopkins, the University of Chicago, not to advance healing, but to create a pipeline for patented treatments that he could control. And any school that didn't comply with this pharmaceutical first model was discredited or shut down. Healing was sidelined. Chronic illness, intentionally or not, became a business model. But the story doesn't end there. By the late 20th century, Big Tobacco stepped in. After smoking faced public backlash, tobacco giants like Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds pivoted with alarming precision into the food industry. They bought up brands like Nabisco, Kraft, and U.S. Foods, merging addiction science with food production. And their aim wasn't nourishment, it was dependence. They weaponized flavor, rigged products to trigger dopamine hits, and then sold them as healthy.
You look at the graph of all chronic conditions, there's just a sharp turn in the 1980s. It's literally almost to the year of the Surgeon General report saying smoking wasn't great. So the second that report came out, Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds were two of the largest companies in the world. It wasn't like Microsoft and Google on the top companies list. It was like cigarette companies. Dopamine is a really good thing to sell, which the tech companies do now. And they used their cash piles. And by 1990, the three largest M&A deals in American history, in world history, were cigarette companies buying food companies. So you had Nabisco bought by R.J. Reynolds, you had Kraft and U.S. Food and you see those graphs of all the food companies owned by like a couple companies. That was the cigarette companies. And they did two things very, very intentionally. They took over the institutions of trust to say ultra-processed food was healthy, and then they took their scientists and rigged the food itself to make it more addictive. Not to kill kids, but to make it more addictive. So you had the literal food pyramid, which said ultra-processed food is great, low fat, carbs, base of the pyramid. That was constructed literally by the cigarette industry to promote their addictive products. And this weaponization of food, as I call it, it's not just like this conspiracy. Literally the cigarette industry, those two companies, Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds, were the two largest food producers in the United States. Like 50% of American food were created by cigarette companies in the 1990s. And they have gotten us addicted and weaponized this food, and all chronic conditions have just shot up. It's because that ultra-processed food, literally, by tobacco industry scientists, hijacks our evolutionary biology. Again, you can't overeat grass-fed steak, but these food, with scientists much smarter than any of us, that's what they're doing. They're shutting off our satiety signals. The byproduct of this cheap addictive food, which we don't even have research for yet, is that it's sprayed with all these chemicals. It's sprayed with 10,000 chemicals that are allowed in the United States when only 400 are allowed in Europe. All these chemicals to make the food addictive, to make the food cheap, to do the monocropping. And that food is absolutely, and we don't need to wait for the research on this, these chemicals, these neurotoxins are destroying our cells, destroying our microbiome in ways we don't fully understand. So I just want to make clear to everyone, this has happened very
And by the 1990s, the companies once known for cigarettes were feeding half of America. They reshaped food science, hijacked government guidelines like the food pyramid, and infiltrated trusted institutions. And as a result, rates of chronic illness from obesity to diabetes, they skyrocketed. The mean siblings don't ask you to believe a theory. They present historical receipts. From the Flexner Report to the engineered rise of ultra-processed foods, it's a tale of institutions hijacked, health deprioritized, and entire generations left sicker by design. The physics of time travel. In episode 1821 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe and comedian Bert Kirshner dive into Terence McKenna's lesser-known but mind-bending theory of time travel. It's one that defies every sci-fi trope we've come to know. And according to McKenna, you can't travel to the past, or not really. Time travel, he argues, only begins the moment the first machine is built. If that machine is switched on in June of 2022, no one can go back to May. The machine becomes a kind of cosmic checkpoint, and from there, you can leap forward endlessly, but not back. This concept cracks open an existential conversation. If time becomes a tool, not a constraint, then so does life. Joe and Bert riff on the idea that future humans could reach a kind of techno-immortality, jumping centuries ahead to unlock advanced medicine, superintelligence, or even a new form of existence altogether. Time itself might collapse into a loop of eternal present, where experience is limitless and death optional. But not everything in this utopia is golden. Joe raises a philosophical snag. Originally, in a world where time is just another road trip, what happens to ideas? If you go to 2150, steal a new invention and bring it back to 2025, did you invent it? Or did the future? And if that future got it from you, then who really started it? In this paradox, intellectual property dies. Innovation becomes circular. Genius, indistinguishable from theft. It's a conversation that blends comedy with cosmic dread. Time travel might not just alter how we live, it could fundamentally erase the concept of new.
What he was saying, you can't travel where there are no roads. So once a road gets built, then you can travel. So once a time machine gets invented, then anyone from the invention of the time machine forward to forever can come back to that moment and can go to any point in time from that moment to the end of time. So all time ceases to be linear. So there's no like tomorrow will be Wednesday and the next day will be Thursday. No. It's everything happens everywhere all at once. So people can travel back and forth through time. You can never own anything because someone could just travel through time and take it away from you when you weren't looking. Like as time travel gets more and more sophisticated, you can go back and forth in time while you're talking to people. You know, if you don't like what you said, you could rewind and start all over again. If you're in an argument with your wife, you can go to the library and get information and come back and go, actually, you know, Herodotus once said, and then bam, your wife thinks you're the smartest guy in the world. Like this, but there would be no normal life anymore. It would the world itself would be completely unrecognizable because time would mean nothing. You'd be able to travel back and forth through time.
All right, so then where would you go right now? Just if I could do, we can time travel right now, go back in
the past.
In the past.
Well,
what's one thing you'd like to see again?
See, that would be a different kind of time travel. That's an unrealistic theatrical version of time travel because, like you said, once time is invented, once time travel is invented, that's the time you can start traveling. So you can't
go before that.
Right.
Okay.
So like here we are, it's May of 2022. If time travel is invented in June, we're not going back to April. You can't go back to April.
Okay.
But you can go from June to a million years in the future and see what people look like. You'll be able to do that. But they'll be able to come back too, and everything's going to be happening everywhere all at once. There's not going to be any sort of structure to life. There's not going to be anything in terms of money, possessions. As long as you could freely time travel, there will be no time. Everything's going to be moving around, and also instantaneously you'll become immortal because whatever we have right now in terms of technology, what we're going to have in a million years is going to be godlike. And you're going to be able to travel to that if in fact that actually does even take place. Because the question becomes like, what is the future if time travel does exist? So if time travel exists in June of 2022, is there even a future? Like, does it even take place? Because how can anybody invent things when they can just travel to a point where someone invented it already? But how are they going to invent it already if you can just travel to the future? And do they invent things still? Or do people, if they do invent things, what's to stop people from going back before them and taking the idea and introducing it before that? Thus, there'll be no intellectual property.
Joe then brings up Roland Millett, a professor from the University of Connecticut, who has spent his life trying to build a time machine. Motivated by the tragic death of his father, Millett created a theoretical model for a working device. However, it requires a staggering amount of energy, something on the level of the sun's output, making it nearly impossible to power with current technology. And even more heartbreaking, Millett understands that McKenna's theory makes his mission completely impossible. No matter how powerful the machine, he can't travel back to a time before it had existed, meaning that he can never ever reach his father.
Think about that.
Is there someone working on time machines right now? There's got to be, right?
Well, there's a guy named Ronald Millett. I think he's out of the University of Connecticut, if you Google this. And he's got the craziest Spider-Man character origin story. His father died, and he became obsessed with time travel because he wanted to go back in time and save his father. So he became a professor studying time travel, and he came up with a workable model of a time machine. but it requires immense power. That's him. Ron Millett built a device that illustrates the principles he believes could be used to build a time machine. But he was one of the people that came up with one of the first people to come up with the realization or the revelation that once that time machine was invented,
his dad died in
from
Vietnam.
then, yeah. It is really like a comic book superhero sort of origin story, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's a great origin story.
Yeah. So this guy has become obsessed and has been working.
To close out this segment, Joe recalls Kurt Gödel, the early 20th century mathematician who developed a solution to Einstein's relativity equations. Gödel models included a rotating universe that theoretically allowed time travel, but it required a machine as large as the solar system. Jealous Chimpanzee. In the episode 1563 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe and Tony Hinchcliffe exposes the science to the brutal edge of animal intelligence, in particular, the jealousy and rage of chimpanzees. They revisit the 2005 incident involving St. James and LaDonna Davis, who brought birthday cake to their former pet chimp, Mo, at a California sanctuary. And what should have been a sweet reunion turned into carnage. Two other chimps, Buddy and Ollie, they saw the cake, saw the affection, and then snapped.
Turn this back to this chimpanzee story, but
Oh, no.
it's a little bit crazier than you probably stopped looking into this.
Oh, it got crazier?
So the guy, he won a lawsuit against West Covina to keep the chimp in the 60s because the judge said the chimp, quote, doesn't have the traits of a wild animal and was somewhat better behaved than some people. So there was some, I was reading more about the story. It ate his, excuse me, according to the reports, it ate his testicles also. And there was some report that it ate part of his brain. Like they cracked open his skull and got a piece of his brain. This chimp was later put into another holding place, escaped again in like 2005 or 8 or something. Because this happened, the original story happened, I don't know, 2002 maybe. The people who originally owned the chimp like rented a helicopter to go find it.
Oh my
There was
God.
more lawsuits.
But you say that he ate his brain. It wasn't that chimp that ate his brain. It wasn't his chimp.
I don't believe so, but this chimp got involved with it says that
It's his chimp that
I
got
think
involved?
That there was a police officer that got into when it got out one time, it got into an altercation with the cop.
Cops, there's 80% of cops, they suck at fighting drunks.
Yeah.
Imagine fighting a chimp. How many videos have you seen of cops trying to pull a guy over and the guy winds up kicking their ass?
Yeah.
Yeah, it says he
Happens
did
a lot.
policeman has required $250,000 in medical treatment for the policeman.
Oh,
Gloria
Jesus.
Allred was defending the chimp in court.
Wow.
Yeah, I swear to God, it gets insane.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
It said the two chimps that bit him the first time didn't have good enough lawyers. This is like on a lawyer website.
Get
I'm
the
reading
fuck
about it.
out.
That
Yeah.
is so crazy. The chimps have lawyers.
Joe unpacks what made this attack so terrifying. Because chimps aren't just wild animals. They're eerily close to us in intelligence, but without our social guardrails. They don't just lash out, they aim. They know where it hurts. Fingers, face, genitals, tools of identity and utility. And the chimps didn't just attack, they dismantled. St. James was left mutilated, his face torn off, fingers gone, genitals destroyed. And they did it because they understood exactly what mattered to him. Tony and Joe reflect on what captivity does to creatures this smart. Chimps aren't meant to live in cages, bored and watched like zoo exhibits. In the wild, they roam, forage, challenge each other. In a sanctuary or zoo, their days are completely flat, repetitive, with no stimulation, just bars and eyes. So over time, frustration builds, and when something ignites it, like seeing another chimp receive cake while they're getting nothing, it explodes into violence.
I know chimps have been in prison more than that guy.
It should be. They should put him in with a chimp. That's what they should do.
Ah.
Yeah, you choke a woman to death, they put you in with a chimp, and they make you feed the other chimp the birthday cake.
It's also interesting how they wrote that. Choked her until she was unconscious and then left her to die.
No, you mean killed her?
Right.
Yeah, what the fuck are you talking
Yeah,
about?
choked her to death.
Yeah, choked her to death. Whoever wrote that?
Yeah,
probably
is that the guy that is that the guy that wrote it? Anyway, left her to die accidentally.
Whoops. Yeah, maybe he's just really into choking. Have you ever been with a girl that wants to get choked?
Yeah.
It's weird, right?
Yeah, I'm not into it.
Not into it.
Yeah.
I don't want to let that fucking genie out of the bottle.
Mm-mm.
Last thing you want to do is be really into choking.
Right.
You know?
No.
It's like being really into feet,
Yeah, weird.
but way worse because it could lead to death.
Joe makes a haunting point. If the man had just brought enough cake for all the chimps, maybe the attack never would have happened. But it goes deeper than cake. These chimps weren't just angry at being left out of a treat. They were very angry about being left out of life. You can't neuter their instincts. You can't sedate their intelligence. And when that intelligence turns sour, it becomes something more terrifying than any wild animal, a mind that knows pain and chooses to inflict it. The Future of Science. In episode 2045 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe sits down with the comedian Jimmy Carr for a conversation that veers from dark humor to deep insight, especially on how entire industries and worldviews can vanish, seemingly overnight. Jimmy challenges the logic of resource-driven global policy by highlighting a bold idea. If the U.S. wants to stand for something truly transformative, why not focus its foreign policy on ending modern slavery? They begin with the case of North Korea, a real-life dystopia where Orwellian surveillance and control are horrifyingly real. Jimmy notes that while America can't change its past sins, like slavery, it can define its legacy going forward. Who would object, he asks, to using the most powerful military in the world to free people from slavery? It's a call for moral clarity in a global system too often driven by oil, minerals, and power plays disguised as peacekeeping.
Yeah. More slaves during the world in the world right now than during 1865 when they abolished slavery in America.
Horrific. And you look at North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
If you want
That's
to see,
the best example.
If you want to see a state where, I mean, we have very little news from there. Very few people get out, but the ones that do, it's
horrific.
George Orwell's 1984. It's happening right now.
Somewhat.
And we're not. Yeah. I mean, I kind of thought that was like an interesting idea on America's original sin is slavery, and there's no way to change the past. But one thing you could do, if you can't work out reparations and people don't seem to be able to work out what to do with that, but one thing you could do is make America's foreign policy, why don't we just stop slavery? Who couldn't get behind that?
Right.
Globally, to say, well, just you've got an incredible military.
Mm-hmm.
There's injustice going on in the world. That idea of being the world's policeman, I don't know. I mean, freeing slaves, who could disagree with that?
Joe, ever the realist, reminds Jimmy that America's global role isn't usually about justice. It's about securing resources and maintaining dominance. But Jimmy fires back with an unexpected rebuttal. Resources aren't eternal. What's valuable now could be obsolete tomorrow. You know what the biggest industry in 1903 was, he asked? Whaling. Within a year and a half, it was dead. Towns built on whale oil collapsed because petrochemicals and electricity replaced it overnight. So progress bulldozed tradition. Jimmy extends the idea further with the story of New York City's infamous horse manure crisis. In the early 1900s, the streets were choked with filth from tens of thousands of horses. Law after law tried to tax and regulate the chaos. Nothing worked until Henry Ford introduced the car. Then, like whaling, the horse-drawn transport industry completely collapsed. There are 5 left in Central Park, he laughs, and they're mostly just for tourists.
That are resources now that won't be in 20 years. You know what the biggest industry in the world was in 1903?
Beavers.
Very close. I'll pass you. I'll give you a C. Whaling was the biggest industry in the world in 1903, and whaling disappeared overnight. Like in a year and a half, it was gone. Those towns were just emptied because the whale oil wasn't required anymore. Because suddenly we discovered petrochemicals.
Electricity too.
Petrochemicals was really the thing. Yeah, the whale oil, electricity, Edison, all of that stuff for Tesla. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting how that industry just fell away. It's like the story of horse manure in New York City. You know this?
No.
So, the takeaway? Entire empires and economies have been built on what we once believed were untouchable necessities: whale oil, horses, and coal. But technology and time made them irrelevant. So, if we're waging wars on building policy on oil today, Jimmy argues, we're investing in a fleeting future. Maybe instead of chasing short money, it's time to think long-term and act on principles that won't expire with the next invention. Quantum computing. In an even more scientifically thrilling chat with Julian Lennon, Joe Rogan explored the mind-bending world of Google's Willow quantum computer. This machine is a major breakthrough, doing things that seem impossible based on our current understanding of physics.
The backstory to this is that Dad had said to me, and I couldn't tell you when or where, just was one of those times that we were together. He just said that, if something ever happens to me, that I'll let you know to let you know that I'm okay, or that we're all going to be okay, will be in the form of a white feather.
Whoa.
So
Joe Rogan broke down the fundamentals of quantum computing for Julian Lennon in a way that was both mind-expanding and surprisingly digestible. Unlike traditional computers that use bits, which are either a 0 or a 1, quantum computers operate with qubits, which due to the phenomenon called superposition, can exist as a 0 and a 1 at the same time. That alone gives quantum computers an exponential edge in processing power. But then it gets even weirder with entanglement, a phenomenon where two qubits become linked, so that the state of one instantly influences the other, no matter how far apart they are. It's as if the laws of space and time don't apply. This bizarre science isn't just theoretical. It has massive real-world potential. Quantum computers can tackle problems that are nearly impossible for classical machines, like breaking encryptions, optimizing supply chains, or simulating complex molecules for a drug discovery. However, there's a catch. These machines are extremely delicate. They require ultra-cold environments, close to absolute zero, and any slight disturbance can mess up their calculations. So no, we're not getting quantum-powered smartphones just yet. What really grabbed both Joe and Julian was something even deeper, almost metaphysical. Joe brought up Harmit Nevin, the physicist and Google executive behind the Willow quantum chip. According to Joe, Nevin made the jaw-dropping suggestion that Willow's strange performance might hint at the existence of a multiverse. The idea that quantum computers may be tapping into multiple parallel universes to perform their calculations, essentially borrowing process power from alternate realities.
With some pretty insanely brilliant people is quantum computing.
Oh, yes.
And this new Google quantum computer that can do essentially the way a quantum computer works, a problem that would take thousands of years for every computer on Earth to solve.
I've read that.
It can solve in a second.
Yeah.
Something that can take more years than you literally can understand. It could be solved in 15 minutes.
Yeah, I read that.
It's insane. And this is where it gets really weird. The way it was explained to me, and we should have to Google how quantum computers work and why people connect them to the multiverse so I don't fuck this up. But the idea is that they're pulling answers from different universes simultaneously. They don't even completely understand how this is working. But the amount of power in computing is incomprehensible.
Yeah.
Like you're only looking at it and there's numbers, you could write all those numbers out, but your brain's not capable of grasping really what's going on. Yeah. And it's probably the biggest breakthrough technologically in human history by a long stretch. And it's all happening without most people even being aware of what the implications are. So see if you can Google an explanation of how quantum computers work. Was it Mark Andreessen that was explaining to us that it's pulling from different universes?
No, that
Who was that?
Being talked about in the wording of the Willow description.
Right.
But I also, just to add, when I was reading about this, they said that these benchmark numbers are coming off of Google's own data. Like they're the ones that set like the scale of what some of the quantum.
Are you skeptical? Is that what you're saying?
I'm just
no. You call bullshit on Google?
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
Is.
No. I'm just a grain of salt, like just to say that, like I think they used tillions is the number or something like that. Septillion. No one even can grasp that.
Yeah,
that's just based, but that's a number based off of their.
The idea is that Willow could be getting answers by communicating with versions of itself in another universe simultaneously. Joe found this wild, admitting even experts don't fully understand how it works, and the power is staggering. For example, Willow did a complex task called random circuit sampling in just 5 minutes. Well, the world's fastest classical supercomputer would take 10 septillion years to do the exact same calculation. That's a 10 followed by 33 zeros, far longer than the age of the universe.
Google's quantum AI founder said the performance gains lends credence to the idea that we live in a multiverse. The idea is that Willow might be communicating with parallel universes to finish calculations faster. Like what does that mean? The announcement led Google's already high stock price to surge, which isn't that shocking, but perhaps most surprising for us lay people that Google's quantum AI founder and lead, Harmut Nevin, said that the chip's performance lends credence to the notion that quantum computation occurs in many parallel universes in line with the idea that we live in a multiverse. And then it says, excuse me? This obviously has caused a bit of a stir and it isn't exactly clear on how he made that leap. It sounds a bit like something out of a sci-fi movie, and I'm definitely not going to pretend I'm an expert, but it's worth pointing out that Google is very much still in the theoretical research phase of this journey. This is very weird stuff.
Willow has over 105 qubits that track all possibilities at once. Nevin's leap to multiverse communication blew Joe's mind. While still theoretical, this does suggest we may be stepping into a future where we interact with other universes. A different human species. In episode number 2249 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe Rogan, Yannis Pappas, and Chris DiStefano went deep into the wildest paleoanthropological discoveries in recent years, the so-called Dragon Man. This ancient human species, officially named Homo longi, was identified from a remarkably preserved skull found in Harbin, China. Though the skull was unearthed back in the 1930s, it wasn't studied in detail until much later, sparking huge debate in the scientific community. The trio marveled at how Dragon Man had a mix of both ancient and modern traits, including a brain size comparable to modern humans, a thick brow ridge, and a low forehead. The skull itself was massive, leading to jokes about how someone might misinterpret skull shapes if they came across modern-day odd couples like Shaq and Bridget the Midget buried side by side. You'd think they were two different species, Chris quipped, setting off a round of laughter.
You see those, they found a new population of humans that existed as recently as, I think, 100,000 years ago. But they found them in China, and they have much larger heads.
Really?
Yeah, they found out, they thought they were Denisovans, I think, at one point in time, which also is fairly new discovery. They found Denisovans in 2010. But this is another one. This is another new species of human being that they studied, that they found, rather. And they had large heads.
Haven't they found 12, 11 different hominids now?
There's quite a few.
Yeah.
There's quite a few, including the really controversial ones like Homo floresiensis or Floresiensis. I forgot how to say
What was that one? What was
Those are the
controversial
Hobbit
about
people.
that one?
The island of Flores. They were little tiny 3 foot tall people.
Little squeaks.
Little twinks.
Little
squeaks. Late 1970s. Yeah, there it is. Homo juliensis. Fossils began belonging to 16 individuals were found in 2 different locations in China. They appeared to belong to unique species, thousands of artifacts, stone tools, and animal bones. This one is the larger-headed one. Is that the same one?
Joe then tied it all back to the larger conversation about human intelligence, noting that early hunter-gatherers actually had bigger brains than us today. You ever see that, he asked? They think they were smarter than us in a practical way, like how to survive out in nature. Giannis agreed, adding that modern humans may dominate technologically, but ancient humans had to develop intense problem-solving skills just to eat and stay alive. This led Joe to bring up the expensive tissue hypothesis, which suggested that a diet high in meat allowed our ancestors to evolve larger brains, since energy can be redirected from gut maintenance to brain power. They also touched on Denisovans, another mysterious human species discovered only in 2010. These ancient humans lived in Asia and interbred with both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, passing along parts of their DNA to some modern populations. But Dragon Man appeared to be a distinct lineage, possibly more closely related to us than even Neanderthals.
It is.
Good point.
You want to talk about fumes? These kids definitely have fumes. Neanderthals?
fumes.
Oh my God,
What
dude.
did
The
they
scent
smell like?
must have been bad, dude.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
Here, Jamie. I think this is a different thing. I'm going to send it to you right now. I'm going to send you the title. I just saved it on my phone so I could look at it later. 'Cause I didn't really look at it too much.
Right.
But they keep finding these new versions of humans.
Right.
So it's like, how many of them were there, and why did we succeed? Like, what was so great about?
I think we were most vicious, right? And we just
Dogs.
killed off
Has
the
to
other
be.
ones?
Dogs.
You think
Has to be.
dogs?
Dogs.
That's the answer.
I know, dude. Yeah.
You're
I mean,
100% positive.
my street smart says it. Science says it. Like it's nascent, in the understanding of how, but it's pretty solid that that's what gave us the edge.
That
we
trained
domesticated dogs.
We teamed up with dogs and we had a symbiotic relationship, and we were able to protect ourselves better.
So
and-
this is it. Large head people, mysterious new form of ancient human emerges. This is it. So a provocative new piece in Nature's as proposed a whole new group of ancient humans, cousins of the Denisovans and Neanderthals that once lived alongside Homo sapiens in Eastern Asia more than 100,000 years ago. Brains of these extinct humans who probably hunted horses in small groups were much bigger than any other hominin of their time, including our own species. This is it. The large head people, yeah. So that's it. It is that name, though. Oh, no.
The real kicker came at the end of the conversation. Why did Homo sapiens survive while all these other human species vanished? Joe floated the idea of raw viciousness, that maybe we simply outcompeted or exterminated the others. But Giannis offered a different theory. Dogs. That's the answer, he said confidently. We domesticated dogs. We had that bond that gave us the edge. Joe agreed, pointing out how powerful a symbiotic relationship like that could have been for protection and hunting and early community building. In short, our survival may have had as much to do with loyalty and teamwork as it did with brain size or tools. Area 51. In episode number 1299 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe sat down with investigative journalist Annie Jacobson to unpack one of the most controversial and mind-bending theories about Area 51, a theory that rewrites the popular alien narrative with a Cold War twist. According to Jacobson, Area 51 wasn't originally just a test site for cutting-edge spy planes like the U-2. Instead, she claims its origins are deeply rooted in Cold War psychological warfare. And at the center of that story is the infamous Roswell crash of 1949.
It's this secret test base where the CIA was running spy plane programs, right? So interestingly, my new book is about ground branch, guys on the ground. That's about air branch, what we were doing in the air. And it was this idea that we should spy on the enemy, okay? But if you go back in time, why Area 51 really started, you learn that it was a base hidden inside of a base, nuclear weapons, and it was all about beating Stalin at his black propaganda campaign, this I write in the book, to hoax Americans in a War of the Worlds type scenario, whereby little men who looked like aliens would get out of an aircraft and the government would go crazy about it. And then Stalin would say, look, not only do we have technology better than you, but we have a better propaganda department than you.
And here's where things get wild. Jacobson's source, allegedly a former Atomic Energy Commission official, told her that the wreckage from Roswell was not extraterrestrial, but rather part of a Soviet black propaganda op. And the twist? The aliens weren't aliens at all. They were surgically altered human beings, genetically or physically modified to appear otherworldly. Part of a Soviet plan under Joseph Stalin to create chaos in the US by mimicking a War of the Worlds style panic. According to her, this craft and its disturbing cargo weren't taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, as the legend goes, but to Area 51 in 1951, which she claims is how the secretive base got its name. Joe, the natural skeptic, pushed back, but how reliable is this source? Because after all, this is a pretty incendiary idea to pin on a single testimony. And Jacobson defended her work, noting she interviewed 79 credible individuals from the CIA, Air Force, and intelligence circles. Although this particular claim centers on one highly placed source, she admitted the backlash was pretty intense, mostly from die-hard conspiracy theorists who wanted it to be aliens, not altered humans.
God, I interviewed 79 CIA guys, Air Force guys, spy pilots, engineers. I mean,
who's mad at you?
The conspiracy theorists were mad at me because they said, this woman is bananas. They were aliens.
Well, even if they weren't aliens, right? There's accounts that it was some sort of a test vehicle and that there were actually just dummies inside there, crash test dummies that they used. There's been a bunch of different versions of it. But the most compelling version of the Area 51 alien myth to me is Bob Lazar. Did you get into that?
Yeah, he plays a huge role in Area 51. I mean, before Bob Lazar went public, no one even knew about Area 51.
People knew. It was common folklore, but there was no definitive proof that there was something going on over there other than some weird VHS footage of things flying around in the desert that seemed to be behaving in a way that modern aircrafts are not totally capable of. At least modern piloted aircrafts are not totally capable of.
I mean, which brings me to another book I wrote called The Pentagon's Brain, which, sort of off this idea was like, wait a minute, what kind of technology is the government capable of? And we have a whole department for that reason called DARPA, which looks at weapon systems 25 years out. So the idea that you and I don't know what the military is capable of in the air, underwater, wherever it may be, is because we're not thinking 25 years out, and they are. And they're developing weapon systems, the great weapon systems of the future. That's what they call it.
And Joe also pointed out other theories that float around the Roswell crash, like it being a military test craft with crash test dummies inside. But for him, the most compelling version of the Area 51 mythology has always come from Bob Lazar, the whistleblower who first popularized the base in mainstream culture. Before Lazar went public, Area 51 was mostly an urban legend, just fuzzy VHS footage of strange lights over the desert and hushed rumors from aviation buffs. Jacobson acknowledged Lazar's impact, saying He plays a significant role in any Area 51 discussion, but her own research leans heavily toward government psyops and Cold War mind games, not aliens from another galaxy. The Psychic Lawyer. Up next, Tom O'Neill reveals to Joe Rogan that Jack Ruby's court-appointed psychiatrist was an MK-Ultra doctor. This segment from Joe Rogan Experience number 1459 with Tom O'Neill is one of the most disturbing and intriguing in the entire JRE catalog. It blurs the lines between history, conspiracy, and state-sanctioned psychological experimentation, centering on Dr. Lewis Jolly West, a key figure in Project MKUltra, the CIA's mind control program.
These apartments and houses that were either look like brothels or hippie communes or whatever, and the people who were working at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic that was run by another Smith, which makes it a little confusing, but Dr. David Smith, who founded it, he had given an office to a scientist named Jolly West, Lewis J. West, who was, when the hearings occurred in the 70s, identified as a top MKUltra researcher. He was an academic, come out of the military, had been at the University of Oklahoma, and then UCLA, running the psychiatric divisions. He denied ever being involved in MKUltra. And this was one of the moments, I think it was 2001, when, things really kind of shook the course of my reporting, was I learned that West had been at the same place that Manson was in the Haight in the summer that Manson became exactly what the CIA was trying to create. And I knew, actually, I'd interviewed West about 7 years before for a story I did about celebrity stalkers, the people who were obsessed with stars and then only to kill them or try to kill them. And he was an expert in violence, hypnotism, brainwashing, and he was the chair of the psychiatry department at UCLA at that point. He was dead when his name came up in the Manson story, and there wasn't a lot of, I guess there was a lot of Google then, or a little bit, but when I did a little research, I found out that there had been these allegations that he'd been involved in MKUltra. He always denied it. He was never prosecuted, never even investigated. He went to his grave threatening to sue anybody that said he would have anything to do with this kind of a program. Again, through another long story, but I got access to his files, which had been left at UCLA, and they had never been processed when I called. And when I made the request, it took them 2 or 3 months to process the papers. I went through them through the whole summer looking for a needle in a haystack, and it was intuition, gut. I just thought there might be something there, and sure enough, I eventually found it. It was correspondence between Jolly West and Sidney Gottlieb, the doctor that ran MKUltra, beginning in 1953, about conducting experiments on people without their...
Tom O'Neill claims, with documentation, that Dr. West was inserted into Jack Ruby's case right after Ruby was convicted for murdering Lee Harvey Oswald, who himself was accused of killing President John F. Kennedy. West, a known MKUltra psychiatrist, had a history of experimenting with LSD and manipulating psychiatric patients under the guise of treatment. When West began working with Ruby, Ruby was reportedly of sound mind, but within 48 hours of West's first examination, Ruby supposedly suffered a complete psychotic break, hallucinating, hiding under tables, and claiming to hear Jewish children being tortured. Ruby would go on to receive 6 months of treatment from West. By the time he testified before the Warren Commission, he was incoherent, rambling about dismembered family members, conspiracies to kill Jews. His testimony was unusable. Whether this mental deterioration was natural or engineered, as MKUltra aimed to do, is a core question.
As I don't have people in here, I'll promote it, because I think this is amazing. This story is crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy, and I think it's also a really important part of human history. Imagine if the whistleblower had not come forward and we didn't know about MKUltra. And all those documents didn't they didn't find the warehouse where the documents were.
Right.
Just imagine.
Oh yeah, we never would have known about
lost, like Kaiser Sose.
Nobody in the program has ever come out and talked about it. I went to a couple of the guys who are still alive, wouldn't talk to me.
Of course.
I mean, they always fall back on, we sign an oath with the agency.
Right.
If we talk to you without permission and they're not going to give us permission, we could go to prison.
Just imagine what life must have been like for them, knowing that this is what they were doing to people.
Oh, yeah.
That's such a strange way to... these people are agents for the federal government. I mean, what kind of precedent does this establish?
Well, most of the people doing the research were subcontracted researchers at, medical personnel at prisons. And in the case of Jolly West, he was first in the Air Force, and then he was in university settings. And Jolly was, once he got to the University of Oklahoma, he was experimenting on patients. And in one of his letters to Gottlieb asking for more funding, he's saying working with psychiatric patients actually benefits us because people can't... I'm not quoting directly here, but he was making the argument that their weird behavior wouldn't be noticed by anybody at the hospitals because they're psychiatric patients. So these people are getting LSD, which is a pretty powerful drug, and other drugs he was using, and he was hypnotizing them in many of his experiments without their knowledge, and they're psychiatric patients. I mean, it's worse than Nazis. Your mind is, the next most important thing besides your soul, and they're tampering with it. One of Jolly's colleagues, the guy who actually took over the department when Jolly in '69 came out to UCLA from Oklahoma, said to me, because I would do this with people, I would show them all the documents, and he said Wes was one of his best friends. He'd known him for, I think, 45 years when Wes died in '99. But he said to me, Jolly, it doesn't surprise me that he would have done this. This is the Jack Ruby stuff, which I guess you haven't gotten to yet. Jolly was Jack Ruby's psychiatrist.
Oh, Jesus.
It's a whole...
And what's more alarming is O'Neill's revelation that Ruby had ties to Operation Mongoose, a covert CIA program to assassinate Fidel Castro, which involved coordination with organized crime figures. And if true, this links Ruby directly to a covert intelligence operation at the heart of Cold War politics and puts a dark spin on his public image as a rogue patriot avenging the president. Joe Rogan's disbelief, holy, is the only sane reaction to what this implies, that a government-funded psychiatrist known for inducing insanity without awareness was embedded in the aftermath of one of the most pivotal assassinations in U.S. history, possibly to silence a key figure.
I can't tell you how hard. You mean West? You mean West and Ruby?
Yes, anyone that could have done something to get Oswald to kill Ruby.
No, Ruby to kill Oswald.
Ruby to kill Oswald.
Ruby had a lot of connections to organized crime and federal. He was part of, which later emerged, the anti-Castro Cuban effort to overthrow Fidel Castro, which was run. It was Operation Mongoose by the CIA. It was an illegal assassination program. Ruby denied being in it, and that's in the book. I found out that, again, through West's papers that I got access to, Ruby admitted never that he stalked and killed Oswald on the orders of anyone, but that he was working with these people who were suspected of being involved in the assassination if there was a conspiracy, and he had never admitted that to anyone. It's only in West's file, and West withheld that.
So let's break that down. So for people that don't know, the primary theory of who was responsible if there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy, and one of the thoughts was that it had to do with some sort of a CIA operation to overthrow Castro.
Yeah, well, the Warren Commission concluded that Oswald acted alone. Right. There was no conspiracy. Allen Dulles, the former head of the CIA who was fired by John F. Kennedy, was second in command to Judge Warren and the commission. Richard Helms, who was actually Jolly West's employer for MKUltra, was the liaison between the CIA and the commission. So Helms knew that Ruby, who they called their most important witness in their investigation, the Warren Commission investigation, because he was the one who silenced the killer. There could be no trial for Oswald because he was dead. So they tried.
Whether you buy the theory or not, Tom O'Neill's work forces us to ask, what was MK Ultra really capable of? And how many threads of American history might have been quietly manipulated under its influence? Alzheimer's Cure. In episode number 2262 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Dr. Mark Gordon drops a revelation that shakes the foundation of modern Alzheimer's research. Joe opens the door with a question that's been lingering in scientific circles. Wasn't there fraud uncovered in past Alzheimer's studies? Dr. Gordon didn't miss a beat. Yes, and what it exposed was even more shocking. Contrary to the widely accepted belief that genetics is the main cause of Alzheimer's, Gordon says that only 5% of cases can be traced to genes. The real culprit? Inflammation, specifically the kind triggered by head trauma and aging.
These appear to be due to trauma and aging. Trauma and aging. Only 5%.
So trauma, like head trauma?
Head trauma. Because what happens is trauma stimulates the brain because of inflammation to increase the production of beta amyloid. And it's because they found recently another secretase. What secretases are the enzymes that convert a protein called APP, Alzheimer's precursor protein. And it's a long protein, and two enzymes go in and clip it here and clip it here. And that piece is beta amyloid. That's the bad stuff. That's a beta secretase and a gamma secretase. But they also have something called alpha secretase. So if alpha secretase and gamma secretase cut this APP, it generates alpha amyloid, which is inert, not inflammatory. And so what did they find recently? Something called delta secretase. Delta secretase and gamma gives you beta amyloid. So how do you generate delta secretase in the body? Trauma, aging. So that's why most of the cases of Alzheimer's disease are inflammatory based. So what are the things that...
I'm sorry, but most cases, is there a certain age where people start to develop it? And has there been any cases of very young people that get Alzheimer's?
There's a young form of Alzheimer's, and that might be directly due to having had head trauma and developing this delta amyloid or delta secretase, generating amyloid, beta amyloid that creates the Alzheimer's disease. As you get older, 65 years of age and above, that could be 5% genetic.
He breaks down the process like a crime scene. A protein called APP, the Alzheimer's precursor protein, is cleaved by enzymes called secretase. The worst combination? Delta secretase and gamma secretase, which together produce beta amyloid, the infamous toxic plaque linked to the disease. But there is a twist. If alpha secretase gets involved instead, it produces a harmless version, alpha amyloid. The outcome depends entirely on the body's inflammatory state. And how does delta secretase show up? Through trauma and aging. That means even young people who've suffered serious head injuries could be vulnerable. Joe is visibly taken aback. So even young people, he asks. Dr. Gordon nods, explaining that early onset Alzheimer's may not be as mysterious as we thought. Trauma creates inflammation. Inflammation creates beta amyloid, and that sets off the devastating chain reaction in the brain.
What was the focus of?
Okay. June 2024 landmark Alzheimer's beta research page was retracted due to fraud allegations. Do we waste billions of dollars and thousands of hours of scientist time? Maybe not. Are new potentially hopeful drugs on the market targeting the subject of the paper, amyloid beta. The video breaks down the amyloid beta hypothesis, the fraud itself, and where we go from here. So what is the fraud itself, Jamie? Does it say? So you can find an article that's just not a video, not attached to a video.
Beta amyloid data. See, they've been relying on beta amyloid as being the focus. And what they're finding is the treatment that addresses beta amyloid, an antibody against beta amyloid, people are still getting progression of the disease.
I understand this, but I just want to know what the fraud was.
Oh, okay.
So what is the fraud?
He circles back to the central idea. Inflammation is the brain's way of trying to protect itself, cleaning out junk like bacteria, viruses, mold, and metabolic waste. But when the process goes haywire, it can lead to degeneration instead of protection. In a few minutes, the paradigm shifts. Genetics may play a role, but inflammation, born from trauma and time, is the silent architect of one of the most feared diseases of our time, Big Pharma. In episode number 2079, Joe sat down with Brigham Butler for a chilling dive into how large language models are reshaping healthcare, and not always for the better. Butler paints the picture. In a perfect world, AI like ChatGPT or MedPalm 2 can give patients instant access to tailored medical insights, even acting like a personal team of doctors whispering advice in your ear. But there's a sinister flip side, one where this treasure trove of data lands in the hands of insurance companies.
From dusk till dawn, watching products that have never had human safety trials go into the body, time and time again. When people think that going into an orthopedic surgery or going into a general surgery or going into an OB-GYN surgery, you make the assumption that all these products have been through human safety studies and all this stuff. And I talked about this on our last podcast too, but over 90% of the products that are in the operating room never went through human safety studies. The FDA created what's called the 510K approval process in the 70s. They said, it's growing too fast, we're bogged down, we can't get to all this shit. Now you're bolting on all these extra products in addition to drugs, and now we're talking biologics, and let's not even get into AI and large language models. You know, to their credit, they're doing their best to navigate a really tough space with a lot of different stuff coming at them. And so they created a loophole. And the premise was less than 10% of the products would come through this channel to get into the operating room. Jump forward to today, and 92% of the products in the operating room came in through the 510K approval process. And what is that process? What it says is, if you can show something in like kind is already in the operating room, then you can do what's called a daisy chain. So imagine iPhone 1 versus the new iPhone, right? That's what we're talking about here. Imagine Henry Ford's car versus Elon Musk's Cybertruck. That's the difference, and it's moving at a breakneck speed. And it's shocking that there's not more adverse events, but we also know that less than 2% of adverse events get reported. And so I can give you a real-world example on that, too. When I was...
If Blue Cross Blue Shield rolled out their own large language model and connected it to your wearable data, Brigham warns, they'll know where your chronic illness is coming before you do, and they'll use it to drop you, deny your care, or hike your premiums. He compares it to someone rifling through your underwear drawer, except this time they're doing it with algorithms, prediction engines, and profit margins in mind. Then comes the real rabbit hole. Pharmacy Benefit Managers, or PBMs, the mysterious middlemen. Originally set up to negotiate lower drug prices, PBMs were quietly scooped up by insurance companies, and soon after, they stopped negotiating for patients and started negotiating rebates for themselves. In 2018, Ohio Medicaid investigation even uncovered $244 million in fraud from PBMs, overcharging the state while underpaying pharmacies. Brigham peels back the curtain on tiered drug pricing. They tell you Tier 1 is the best drug, but really, it's the most profitable. Tier 4, it might work better, but they make less money on it. So when a weight loss drug like GLP-1 is labeled Tier 4 with a $1,300 price tag, the insurer never pays that amount. They pay less, collect back-end rebates, then hit you with a fat copay.
Prioritize drugs and their classifications not based off efficacy, based off profits, right? And so they are monetizing those drugs through rebates with the big insurance companies. So insulin's a prime example. The Senate House Committee did a study on insulin where they found like the price of insulin was $284 a vial. Do you know how much made it back to the company to the pharmaceutical company that was making that insulin? Less than $40. Where the hell did all that extra money go? It went to the pharmacy benefit managers and the insurance companies through rebates. And so this is the whole other area of healthcare that people aren't understanding, and I tried to explain it on the last podcast. I know we dove deep into it, but it is a crucial component for people to get their head around what's happening. So insurance companies, so many people say, well, I have health insurance, right? That drug isn't covered by my health insurance, so it must be bullshit. Or that test isn't covered by my health insurance, so it must be bullshit. No. You don't have health insurance. What you have is managed care plan. They've renamed these plans. It isn't health insurance, it's a managed care plan. And what do I mean by that? They're managing your medications, your treatment options, and they're monetizing your disease state. They make money on every step of the way. And since the last time we spoke, a new one came out, Ohio, the state of Ohio, they realized that over 200 pharmacies had gone out of business. The pharmacies were saying we're getting paid less and less, but yet the government was paying more and more. Why? How? Where was that money coming from? Where was it going? When they used, I can't remember, 30-something auditors at the state level, and what they found was $240 million in pharmacy benefit manager fraud. $240 million in money that they extrapolated from the American people, from the people of the state of Ohio, because taxpayer dollars are who's paying for this stuff. And these pharmacy benefit managers are...
The final gut punch comes from Brigham's friend with MS. His insurer claimed to pay $14,000 per month for his meds, only to secretly negotiate a discount while using the inflated number to raise premiums for everyone else. The system's not broken, Brigham concludes. It's working exactly as it was built, to make money, not to make you better. Black holes. Later in episode number 2080 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe sat down with John Reeves to unpack some of the universe's most mind-bending mysteries. Their conversation touched on everything from black holes and alien life to the idea of interdimensional beings. But one theory stood out: the possibility that the universe and the human brain share a fundamental connection.
Deeper than that. First of all, in the center of every galaxy is a supermassive black hole that I think it's 1/2% of the mass of the entire galaxy. It's in the something along those lines. It's at so the larger the galaxy, the larger the supermassive black hole. And there's real speculation that if you went through that black hole, you reach another universe with also hundreds of billions of galaxies, each with hundreds of billions of stars. Each one of those galaxies has a supermassive black hole. You go through that, another universe. Hundreds of billions of galaxies, hundreds of billions of black holes. Go through them, hundreds of billions of galaxies, new universes.
Joe began by discussing supermassive black holes, the giants found at the center of every galaxy. Despite their size, these black holes only account for a small fraction of a galaxy's total mass. Yet, intriguingly, the larger the galaxy, the larger the black hole. This led to a wild idea. What if black holes aren't just destructive forces, but gateways? Imagine falling into one and emerging in an entirely new universe, one just as vast as our own. That universe, too, could have galaxies with black holes at their centers, repeating the cycle endlessly. It hints at a cosmic chain of universes, each connected by these mysterious objects. Joe often emphasizes how little we understand about the universe. He compared our knowledge to a single grain of sand or even smaller, maybe even a subatomic particle. It's possible, he amused, that reality is fractal, repeating its patterns on every scale. This led to one of the episode's most intriguing points, the visual similarity between brain neurons and the structure of the universe. Joe referenced side-by-side images of the cosmic web and neural networks, and they looked eerily alike. What if that's not a coincidence? What if the universe itself is a brain cell inside something much larger, perhaps part of a being, or even a civilization in another universe?
Yeah, which is weird that like the universe is so big we can't even wrap our head around it, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is not even a good way to describe it. It's a grain of sand. Maybe it's not even a grain of sand. Maybe it's an atom. Maybe it's not even an atom. Maybe it's a subatomic particle. And maybe the whole thing is fractal. So maybe what we are and what this planet is. I mean, I'm sure you've seen when they look at, have you ever seen the a map of the known universe in comparison to a neuron in the human brain? Mm-mm. See if you can find that. It's entirely possible that it's just constantly, if you constantly expand further and further out, that this entire universe is an atom. It's a part of a much larger organism that exists in another universe that is infinitely large, that is impossible for us to grasp our head around. So that's a brain cell, and that's galaxies. And when you look at that, I mean, goddamn, those things look the same. They look the same. The neural network and the cosmic web, they look the same. And if they are the same, if that is what a brain cell is, and that the entire universe is a part of the brain of an infinitely large individual that's a part of a civilization that also exists in another universe that's a part of an infinitely large being that's a brain cell of that universe is a brain cell of that thing, and that it just keeps going and going and going and going. And even the idea of the Big Bang is just like, maybe not, maybe it's always been here, maybe it's just constant, and maybe it's God.
It's a perspective that flips everything. Maybe the universe didn't begin with a bang. Maybe it's always been there. And maybe, just maybe, it is something conscious, something like God. Cryonics versus mortality. Joe Rogan and Sal Vulcano explore the idea of cryogenic preservation as a way to cheat death in episode 2159. Sal shares he's had his DNA and sperm saved, viewing it as a hedge against mortality.
I have my DNA saved. DNA and sperm.
Yeah?
Yeah. I remember I had the option. I was like, let me do it.
You might
Why
as
not?
well. You
Yeah.
got all the way from the Iceman to today. It'd be a shame if we lost it. You know, if it died here, if that's it.
Did you hear about the cryogenic people? You know how like they started cryogenically freezing people a long time ago?
They accidentally thawed out.
Yeah, some of them, like, it didn't work.
No.
The one, like, headline was like, yeah, they were scraping goo off the bottom of the thing or something.
Yeah,
like
whoops.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like, if the power goes out and you thaw out, that's a wrap.
That shit's fascinating. Isn't it only like one company or something that's doing that? Or
imagine if you're in heaven, okay?
Yeah.
And you died, you went to heaven, and you're like, God, I'm free of all my earthly pulls, and I just feel one connected, and all of a sudden, you get sucked back to life again, and they're stitching your fucking head on this new body, and you're alive now, but you're paralyzed. But with new technology, they can keep you alive forever. Right. You're like, no!
Right. And what year is it?
Congratulations, Walt Disney's back. Like, no!
Isn't
you were in
Yastrzemski?
heaven. Imagine
Yastrzemski?
if you were in heaven.
Yeah.
But
No,
imagine
fuck
if during the process of reattaching your head, it made your mouth paralyzed, so you couldn't even talk. Hell.
Yeah,
That's hell.
It's like the fucking movie where they eat each other, so to each other's ass.
Could you imagine if you're dead for like 100 years, and 100 years of heaven? Like, this is so much nicer than being alive. Oh my God, everyone's just, there's no arguments. It's just love and beauty and just the expression of love and geometric patterns, and it flows through you, and we all bathe in it. No one needs to eat, no one needs to sleep.
I've arrived.
It's just love, and then all of a sudden, like a funnel, clear, sucking you back down.
Oh, God.
And they just stitch in your fucking head. You can't talk because your mouth's paralyzed.
Yeah, and they pay for that.
They discuss how cryonics involves freezing bodies at ultra-low temperatures after legal death, hoping future tech can revive people and cure their ailments. Joe mentions Ted Williams, the baseball legend whose body was cryogenically preserved. But the process is fraught with challenges, like thawing due to power failures, and the grim reality that revival might not restore full function, potentially leaving someone paralyzed or unable to speak. Sal questions whether those signing up fully grasp the future they're betting on. Joe adds that if revival ever works, the world they return to will be vastly different. Everyone else likely dead, society alien, and their place uncertain. The sci-fi fantasy of awakening to a futuristic utopia is probably far from reality. The conversation then deepens into the nature of consciousness. Joe acknowledges his own awareness, but wonders if consciousness is just brain activity or something more mysterious. Damage to brain areas clearly affects consciousness, yet he suspects science might be missing parts of the picture, implying consciousness could transcend just neurons firing. This speculative idea highlights how much about consciousness remains unknown.
What are you coming back to? Everybody that didn't do it is dead. You know no one. You probably are not going to be able to adjust to whatever society they're in now. Who knows how people would treat you? Like, you're really signing up for something like, it's like, what are you signing up for?
I think they're signing up for the hope that if they do get reincarnated, it's like Space 2001. Like you get reincarnated to this crazy futuristic world where they can, welcome back. How was your trip, sir?
You think they're trying to preserve consciousness? Their consciousness?
I don't know what consciousness is really. Here's the question. I mean, I know I'm conscious. I know you can have this conversation. I think, therefore I am. I get it. I don't know if consciousness is something the brain tunes into or whether the brain is conscious. I know if you damage parts of the brain, it damages parts of your consciousness and damages different things that you can do. And they're pretty clear on what parts of the brain are responsible for different things, but I'm not sure that consciousness is something as simple as neurons firing and your brain interfacing with the world and using all its senses. I have a feeling that we might be short-sighted because we can't, and again, this is not scientifically provable, so you have to be just speculative about something like this. But I have a feeling there's probably quite a few things that we're not totally in tune with to the point where we can measure them.
Yeah.
And I think consciousness might be one of those things. I also think we are all weirdly connected in some strange consciousness web.
Together, their discussion blends curiosity about life extension with existential questions. What does it mean to be conscious? Can technology really bring us back? And if so, what kind of life would await us in a future that we can barely imagine? It's a fascinating mix of hope, skepticism, and wonder about the limits of science and the essence of being alive. Mars as Earth 2.0. In episode 2054, Elon Musk begins painting his grand vision for Mars. He tells Joe about vast frozen oceans beneath the Martian crust, revealing his dream of transforming the red planet into Earth 2.0. As they study an image of ancient Mars, blue, lush, and full of promise, Joe naturally asks, what happened to all that water? Elon explains we're still mostly molten rock underneath, like creme brulee, thin crust on top, lava just below. Earth's stability is barely skin deep.
When you do eventually colonize Mars, what's the idea in terms of terraforming? Is it contained ecosystems that are under domes? Like what are you planning on doing to make it habitable?
Well, at first you would have to have a life support system, because Mars has a low density atmosphere, only about 1% the density of Earth, and it's primarily CO2. Now, over time, you can terraform Mars. Terraform means make it like Earth, essentially. And if you warm Mars up, you will. There's a bunch of frozen CO2 that will evaporate, densify the atmosphere, and you'd actually want kind of global warming on Mars, because Mars is about 50% further away from the sun than the Earth. So it gets about less than half the solar energy that Earth does.
And it's believed at one point in time Mars had a much different environment, right?
It appears highly likely that Mars had liquid oceans, albeit a long time ago. There's a lot of ice. So Mars is covered in ice. And now the ice is then covered in dust for the mostly, except at the poles. So there's a lot of ice. In fact, I believe if Mars was warmed up, you'd have an ocean about a mile deep on 40% of the planet. So it's quite a lot of water.
And do we think that it was like that at one point in time?
The evidence suggests that it is most likely that Mars had liquid water.
What's the prevailing theory of its demise?
Well, just over time, the solar system cooled. So Earth used to be much hot. In the very early Earth was like molten rock. So really almost nothing could survive in the beginning. We were just a ball of lava. We're still mostly a ball of lava. We're like creme brulee. Like there's a thin crust, and it's mushy rock very hot mushy rock underneath. And technically that rock is in a semi-solid state, but as soon as it gets to a low pressure, like pops out of the ocean, you have a volcano, obviously, with lava.
Yeah.
So it's at surface ambient pressure, we're basically covered in liquid.
But reality gets even stranger. Joe brings up something uncanny. Back in 1952, Wernher von Braun, a former Nazi and one of NASA's founding minds, wrote a novel about colonizing Mars. The leader of the Martian government in his book, a man named Elon. Coincidence or simulation? That's when the conversation veers into the theory that's kept philosophers and stoners alike up at night. Are we living in a simulation? In episode 1169, Elon dives in. If civilization improves, even slightly, then within 1,000 or million years, games and simulations would become indistinguishable from real life. So, if it can happen, it probably already has. We're either in the real world on the road to full immersion, or we're already there.
This is not relevant to AI. You can't take 10 years from the point at which it's dangerous. It's too late.
And you feel like this is decades away or years away from being too late? If you have this fatalistic attitude and you feel like it's we're in almost like a doomsday countdown.
It's not necessarily a doomsday countdown. It's a
out of control countdown.
Out of control, yeah. People call it the singularity, and that's probably a good way to think about it. It's a singularity. It's hard to predict, like a black hole. What happens past the event horizon?
Right. So once it's implemented, it's very different because it will
once
be able to.
Once the genie's out of the bottle, what's going to happen?
And it will be able to improve itself.
Yes.
That's where it gets spooky, right? The idea that it can do thousands of years of innovation, very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And then we'll be just ridiculous.
Ridiculous.
We will be like this ridiculous biological shitting, pissing thing trying to stop the gods. No, stop. We like living with a finite lifespan and watching, Norman Rockwell paintings.
It could be terrible, and it could be great. It's not clear.
And they go deeper. Elon muses, if this is a simulation, base reality must be boring. Why else would someone create a version of life so much more intense? Simulations, like movies, compress drama. Real life is slow. Simulated life, exciting. It's why we don't film movies in real time. Eventually, the conversation shifts inward. Joe asks Elon what it's like to be him. Elon, quiet for a moment, describes a mind that's constantly erupting, endless, high RPM thoughts, never stopping, not even when he's brushing his teeth. He tried meditation, but his furnace of ideas wouldn't quiet. He first noticed this as a child. At 6, he realized other kids weren't like him. He feared someone might find out and lock him away. Joe wonders if Elon is a biological outlier, like a 7-foot 9-inch man in the mental realm. Elon doesn't confirm, but the look in his eyes says it all. Microdosing. In episode 1035, Joe's discussion with Paul Stamets illuminated the profound and diverse roles of fungi, beginning with the Amadou mushroom's historical utility as a fire starter and in warfare, even found with the Iceman. Fungi are portrayed as ancient, foundational organisms with vast, sentient mycelial networks, forming Earth's natural internet, crucial for biodiversity and ecosystem health.
This mushroom is a fire starter mushroom. It allowed for the portability of fire. There's no doubt that we came from Africa. We migrated north. We discovered something new called winter. Oops. This allowed for the portability of fire. You can hollow this mushroom out, put embers of fire inside, and carry fire for days. If your clan could not rekindle fire in Europe in the wintertime, you would die. So this hat's actually made by some ladies in Transylvania.
Can I feel that?
Yeah, and it's a hardwood conch.
Oh, wow.
Their intelligence is exemplified by a slime mold mapping the Tokyo subway more efficiently than its human design. Fungi also serves as architects of our existence, creating habitats and influencing ecosystems, sharing deep evolutionary ties with animals. Psilocybin mushrooms were explored as potential drivers of human evolution, with a Stone Age hypothesis suggesting their role in the rapid doubling of the human brain, language development, and fostering leadership traits like courage and empathy through neurogenesis and fear response extinction. Clinical studies from Johns Hopkins demonstrates psilocybin's therapeutic potential for end-of-life depression, PTSD, and addiction, showing significant societal benefits, including an 18 to 27% reduction in criminal activity among former inmates. A personal account detailed psilocybin's role in curing a congenital stutter.
In the animal kingdom that we haven't discovered?
Well, that stimulates my thought into talking about the microbiome. The mycelial landscapes networks, they don't live by themselves. They select a microbiome of bacteria and other organisms that rest upon the mantle. These fungal networks are the foundation of the food web. Well, similarly, we have a microbiome. And it's really interesting that the many of the bacterial diseases that infect fungi also infect us. Our best antibiotics against bacteria come from fungi, penicillin being the obvious example. But we have found now doing next-gen sequencing, and this has never been published before, that the mycelial mats growing in the very same wood chips, in our case, that had been fermented, we had a 1,000-fold difference in the relative abundance of genera of bacteria from the very same wood chips, 2 different mushroom species planted on those wood chips, and the microbiomes that were created and selected for by the mycelium were vastly different. This really strongly supports the concept. This is a hypothesis with quickly becoming a theory. I'll explain the difference in a minute. But this really supports the concept that I've long believed and espoused, that these mycelial networks are not just happenstance. They're creating the habitats and the flora and then ultimately the fauna that are resident within the ecosystem to guarantee the plurality and the biodiversity of the ecosystem by creating the plants that grow up, that feed the animals, the insects to create the debris fields, and then feed the mycelium for the benefit of the progeny of the mushrooms that will form thereafter. So these are deterministic organisms that are setting the stage for ecological evolution.
And you think that they're doing this in a conscious manner?
Well, see, again, we're a victim of our consciousness trying to define what is conscious and what is smart. And one of the best arguments I've had, my brother Bill is a super genius, is far smarter than myself. and he was editing one of my books, Mycelium Running, How Mushrooms Can Help Save the World, and he goes, Paul, you cannot say that mycelium is intelligent. And then he says, you can't say nature is intelligent. I go, wait, Bill, I respect you, but you didn't realize the hypocrisy of the statement that you're giving me? You're telling me nature is not intelligent, and yet you are born of nature, using the mind to conceive the concept, to challenge the idea that nature is not intelligent when you are part of nature? I rest my...
Beyond psilocybin, other medicinal mushrooms were highlighted. Lion's mane shows neurogenic properties, promising for cognitive function and potentially preventing Alzheimer's by regenerating myelin and resolving amyloid plaques. A major breakthrough involved mushroom extracts, particularly from amadou, doubling bees' lifespans and drastically reducing deformed wing virus, offering a solution to colony collapse disorder.
No, I absolutely agree with you that conventional treatments are state-of-the-art, and this is state-of-the-art science. When you're talking about dealing with cancer, you should deal with oncologists that are at the cutting edge. But they're not state-of-the-art when it comes to the preventing of these things. And that's a giant issue that a lot of people have when it comes to nutrition, lifestyle, mitigating stress, all of the various factors that contribute to a bunch of different health ailments. Do you think that mushrooms could also play a factor in that as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a great epidemiological study that came out of Japan, and Dr. Ikikawa was an epidemiologist that worked for the National Cancer Center in Tokyo. And they noticed in surveying people in Japan in the 1960s, early 1970s, there was a drop in the overall cancer rate in this one population in Nagano Prefecture in Japan. So he was sent there by the National Cancer Center of Tokyo, by the government, to say, what are these people doing in this one cluster of villages where they have statistically significant less cancer rates? We're talking about 30% less than the national average. And after exhaustive study, he found that they were eating enoki mushrooms, a lot of them, because the enoki mushrooms are really thin ones, like really tall stems. You can buy them in the store. Well, there's the big farming centers for enoki mushrooms there, and then the blemished ones, as cultivators know, you don't sell to the public the ones that have little spots on them or deformed, but they're given to the workers, and so their workers and then their families eat a higher per capita consumption of enoki mushrooms than the other residents of Japan. So they found that specifically the consumption of enoki mushrooms resulted in a reduction of cancer across the board, of all cancers, statistically significant. I think over 220,000 people.
Agarikon, an ancient polypore, exhibited potential antiviral activity against flu, herpes, proxyvirus, including smallpox, and HPV, underscoring the vital need to preserve old-growth forests for their fungal genomic resources. Science can't beat God. Up next, Sadhguru highlighted the severe global crisis of soil degradation to Joe, stating that only about 45 to 60 years of topsoil may remain if current agricultural practices persist in episode 1791. This depletion is directly linked to a significant loss of nutrients in food, with a reported 90% drop in micronutrient content in vegetables since the early 20th century, leading to a widespread deficiency in the population. The problem extends to farmers, who face rising input costs and diminishing yields, contributing to a high suicide rate in both the United States and India.
When they're talking about organic farming, they're talking about farming with no pesticides, no herbicides.
No pesticides, no fertilizer, all this. For this
no fertilizer?
Yeah,
fertilizer is non-organic?
Yes, it is chemical fertilizer, right?
Oh, okay, but what about organic fertilizer?
That is a manure.
Right.
Okay, that is, organic content is different.
So that's
okay. People who are talking about this, it's an ideal life, okay?
Right.
But will farmer who is doing it for his commercial requirement, will he be able to conduct his agriculture in an idealistic way? No, believe me, I've been engaged with farmers. It's not like that. It's like you're eating good food, but if you have yourself checked up, your doctor may say, well, your calcium is little deficient, your iron is deficient,
right.
So take these 2 pills. So you took these 2 pills and tomorrow you felt great. Then you decided you don't have to really eat food, you can just eat a lot of these pills and you will be fine. That is how we have done agriculture. We had rich soil, in that whatever is deficient, we put a little bit of nitrogen or phosphate or something, suddenly the crops burst out.
Yes.
Then we forgot that we have to put organic content. We just started putting these salts forever, and in 25 to 30 years' time, the soil becomes fallow.
Monoculture farming, which involves deep plowing and leaving soil exposed, is identified as detrimental, destroying the vital microbial life within the soil, a complex and living marketplace of organisms. The proposed solution involves a global Save Soil movement, advocating for regenerative, tree-based agriculture and returning organic matter to the earth, aiming to gather billions of voices for policy change. The conversation then expanded to the broader implication for human health and well-being. It was asserted that declining soil health directly impacts human health, contributing to widespread micronutrient deficiencies and increased susceptibility to illnesses. The reliance on pills, escalating healthcare costs, and rising obesity rates are presented as consequences of nutrient-deficient food and a societal disconnect from nature. The high-heel life, physically and mentally insulated from the earth, hinders the essential microbial connection between humans and soil, even being linked to potential mental illness pandemic.
Are now is a reflection of what's in the soil. The moment you weaken the soil, life on the planet will start becoming weak. People don't notice this. I know this is a controversial thing to say, but I think you're known for controversy, so what's my problem? So, I'm saying, see, for example, there are certain countries which are suffering this whole coronavirus much more than the other. I don't want to make a absolute statement about this, but one thing is something we must look at is, any doctor, you don't need a top virologist, a simple doctor will tell you, if you lack vitamin A, vitamin B6, B12, D, E, and folate and iron and zinc and magnesium in your system, you will become susceptible to upper respiratory tract infections. This is a known fact.
Yes.
So, what is the deficiency in America? Vitamin E, most Americans are 90% deficient.
D.
Yes.
Yes.
Vitamin A, 43% deficient. Vitamin C, 39% deficient. Like this you can go on. With all these deficiencies, we are trying to make it up with pills.
Another core theme of the discussion centered on the internal nature of human experience, which is very spiritual, emphasizing that joy and misery originate from within, introspective of external circumstances. The relentless pursuit of external happiness and profit is characterized as a destructive force rather than a conscious choice. The path to eternal pleasantness and peace involves cultivating conscious responses to life, replacing unconscious, compulsive reactions. When people practice yoga, they engage with a comprehensive toolkit for self-management, methods to consciously govern the body, mind, emotions, and energy. The ancient science attributed to the Adi Yoga, believed to have lived over 15,000 years ago, offers 112 distinct methods for inner transformation. His teachings weren't about becoming superhuman, but about realizing the full depth of human potential on what it truly means to be a superhuman being.
Will you tell the story about God getting all the gurus together, all the different types of yogis together?
Okay. So, this is on a certain day, 4 yogis are walking in the forest. One is a Gnana yogi, yoga of intelligence, another is a Karma yogi, body yoga, another is Bhakti yogi, emotional and devotional yogi, another is a Kriya yogi, master of energies. So suddenly a storm picks up and they start running to find a shelter. The Bhakti yogi who has… who knows the geography of temples in the area, he says, let's go in this direction, there's an ancient temple there. So they all ran there. Then they found an ancient temple where the walls had collapsed long time ago, just the roof, and in the center there's a deity. They all rushed into the temple, not out of love for the deity or God, but just to escape the storm. Then the storm started lashing from every direction. So they got closer, there was no other place to sit. So they all four of them hugged the deity and sat down. Suddenly God appeared. They all wondered, why now? We did so much yoga, you didn't come. Now when we're just escaping the storm, you turn up. So they looked at him, why now? So God said, at last you four idiots got together. I've been waiting for this for a long time. Body going one direction, mind going another direction, emotion another way. How will anything happen? These four things have to come together. This is very important. But today, the way it is happening, the yoga, it's become very more like a exercise. If you want exercise, there are so many ways to do it. Go have a swim, maybe play tennis, maybe climb a mountain. You'll get much better exercise. Yoga is not for exercise, it'll also give you that, it'll give you fitness also. There are different types of yogas. For fitness, there are certain kind of yoga. You must come, we can do this with you, it's called Angamardana. That means mastering your limbs.
Expanding universe. In another tense conversation on the universe with Neil deGrasse Tyson, in episode 1658, Joe traversed a wide array of topics, beginning with observations on seemingly random patterns in the world, such as how leaves accumulate in streets, not evenly spread, but in eddies due to air currents, contrasting this with artificial, evenly distributed patterns like stars on a ceiling. This led to a discussion on the scrutiny applied to observations and data, exemplified by the investigations into unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs.
Been hovering over defense systems, and they don't know what they are. They don't know how they operate. There's a film that was released recently by Jeremy Corbell that also came from the Navy, where it shows one that's a transmedium device. It actually flies through the air and then goes into the water. And this is being filmed.
That's how they interpreted the information that was in front of them. Yeah,
exactly.
Just to be clear.
Yes, but it did go in the water. There's a film of it actually going in the water, and they talk about it splashing down. They're monitoring it.
Well, they talked about there was a Whitecaps where they think it was submerged. I think wasn't that the
well, we could
description?
see it. It actually went underwater, and then they went to look for it, and they couldn't find it. They used a submarine. They used sonar. They don't know what it is.
Yeah, so I hope they keep checking to find out what it is.
It'd be nice to know what that is.
Oh, yeah.
Something that can travel through the sky and also go through the ocean. That's pretty crazy.
I want the military to understand that signal they're getting on their equipment.
Yes.
Because there's equipment between you and what's going on, typically. When it's sort of Navy sensors and trackers and that sort of thing. Other things are things people see in the sky with their own senses, right?
Yeah.
Just the light in the sky, and it moves in ways they don't understand or can't explain. So, but a point I've made before, I'll just rehash it here. We live in a time where everyone is equipped with a high-resolution color camera and video recorder. Basically everyone. And if you run the numbers on it, it's about, I got this from someone from Google, there's about 6 billion photos and videos uplifted to the internet every day. And in that collection, you find really rare things that you only heard about, or maybe you saw the results of, but you didn't actually see it happen. So there are videos of buses tumbling in the winds of a tornado. Now, in the aftermath of a tornado, there's a bus on its side, and so you knew wind took it there, but previously, no one is going to say, oh, that bus is about to lift into the air, Wizard of Oz style, like the house. Let me go in and get my movie.
A skeptical yet inquisitive perspective was maintained regarding UAPs, emphasizing that while military investigations into unknown aerial objects are warranted, the lack of high-resolution, widely available video footage is a significant hurdle to confirming extraterrestrial visitation, especially given the ubiquity of high-resolution cameras. The notion that advanced alien civilizations would likely remain unseen if they wished to avoid detection was raised, and the history of Hollywood depicting malevolent aliens was reinterpreted as a reflection of humanity's own historical behavior when a technologically superior civilization encounters a lesser one. Analogies were drawn to scientific historical discoveries, such as the search for Planet X, which was ultimately debunked by careful reevaluation of data, illustrating how scientific truth emerges from rigorous scrutiny, not just initial observations. The concept of absence of evidence not always equating to evidence of absence was also explored through a thought experiment about a cave and a bear.
Really talked about it. I have books from that period. There is no chapter on cosmology. It ends with the starry skies of the night. It's starting with the discussion of the planets. And it doesn't even go there because it doesn't know to go there until you have data forcing the question.
There wasn't enough information.
Correct. And then we say, oh my gosh, the universe is expanding, discovered by Hubble in 1929. That means it's bigger today than it was yesterday. It's bigger yesterday than it was the day before. Let's run the clock back.
What about...
Could all the universe have been in the same place at the same time? That meant it might have had a beginning. That's what started.
Say that again?
If we're expanding,
right,
run the clock back, we were smaller in the past. Could the whole universe been in the same place at the same time at some distant point? If it was, that means the universe had a beginning. That's when the whole conversation began about the universe having a beginning. It had nothing to do with the fact that we're born and we live out our lives and die. It had nothing to do with that. So
the discussion then shifted to the future of human technology symbiosis, noting that humanity is already deeply intertwined with chemistry, e.g. pharmaceuticals extending life expectancy, while acknowledging the potential of future innovations like genetic engineering and neural interfaces. Skepticism was voiced about technology replacing the nuanced complexities of human communication or entirely eliminating deception. The importance of wisdom, distinct from mere knowledge, was highlighted, along with a proposed framework for understanding truths, personal beliefs, politically propagated truths, and objective truths established by scientific methods, myths like the 10% brain usage, and the allure of psychic abilities were debunked, emphasizing the need for repeatable, scientifically verifiable phenomena.
Slow, clumsy process, but that's all you got. The person who had an article said, the brain is so complex. Today, we only know what 10% of it is used for.
And that got...
Overnight, that became we only use 10% of our brain. And that became the mantra of school teachers getting children to rise to their potential. And there was no force operating against that coming into our culture.
It wouldn't have ruined the movie if they didn't have that in there. I mean, there's no reason for that to be in the movie. The movie was fascinating as it was.
They could have just given her some other power, but they went with that 10% thing.
Yeah, but even they didn't even need to do that.
Okay, can I give my critique even of that? Let's say we did only use 10% of our brain.
Okay.
Here's my critique. Even if that were true.
Okay.
The smartest people you know, do they have an inkling of kinetic powers over objects in front of them?
It was noted that certain questions like which way is north at the North Pole or paradoxes involving Pinocchio inherently lack meaning within their given context. The universe's beginning, the Big Bang, was presented as a concept derived from observational data, not human bias. The accelerating expansion of the universe and the speculative Big Rip scenario for its ultimate end were discussed, along with the mind-bending concept of a multiverse containing an infinite number of universes, some with different laws of physics. The science of consciousness. Next up, Sir Roger Penrose, in episode number 1216, began by exploring the profound nature of consciousness, pondering whether it's merely a complex calculation or something more, perhaps even from a scientific standpoint. The inquiry stemmed from various foundational concepts encountered during academic pursuits. Early influences included discussions on general relativity and cosmology, as well as the peculiar principles of quantum mechanics, particularly the idea of superposition, where particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously.
What do you think consciousness is?
Well, you see, I mean, it's going too far to think, I know what the answer is or anything like that.
Of course.
I just think that this issue of having some kind of quantum state which preserves itself up to a certain level, and the microtubules at least suggested something where you could isolate them from the outside, and the symmetry of these things is important. And there are other structures. I suspect it's not just microtubules. I suspect there are these thing called clathrins. These are molecules which inhabit the synapses. And the thing about these ones is that they're incredibly symmetrical. They're like a soccer ball. You know, you have these pentagons and hexagons, and at each vertex you've got a protein. It's called a triskelion, and they join themselves along the edges of the pattern of the soccer ball. Okay, but it's just a substance. I mean, it's made of these proteins. And what are they doing hanging around in the synapses? I don't know. But the symmetry has a key role. There's a thing called the Jahn-Teller effect in quantum mechanics, which tells you that when you have a highly symmetrical structure like that, then there can be a big gap between the lowest energy level and the next one. And there can be information in this lowest energy level which can be shielded from the higher energy levels. So this is a sort of suggestion that some kind of quantum phenomenon is going on in a serious way.
A key turning point was an exposition on mathematical logic, specifically Gödel's incompleteness theorem. This theorem suggests that within any consistent formal system, there will always be true statements that cannot be proven by the system's own rules. This led to the powerful realization that human understanding and conscious thought are likely not algorithmic or reducible to computations that a machine could perform. This non-computational aspect of consciousness then raised questions about its physical basis. While classical physics seems computable, quantum mechanics presented a puzzle: the measurement process or collapse of the wave function. This phenomenon, famously illustrated by Schrödinger's cat paradox, implies that a quantum state decides on a single outcome, a behavior not described by the standard evolutionary equation of quantum states. This unresolved aspect of quantum mechanics suggests a gap in current understanding where consciousness might reside.
In one of my books, I tried to explain there are actually two mysteries in quantum mechanics, and they get muddled. One of them is the whole subject is pretty crazy, yes, but it's coherent and it makes sense. And if you study it properly and you say, okay, that makes sense. And this includes things like non-local effects, where you can have two things now even thousands of kilometers apart, and you can see these quantum entanglement effects. So they're still, in some sense, connected with each other, even though they're that far apart, which is pretty amazing.
That's baffling.
That's baffling, but that's part of the comprehensible part of quantum mechanics. It's muddied up because there's the other part, which has to do with this collapse of the wave function. And standard quantum mechanics really doesn't make sense. But people get them muddled, in my view. You think because this doesn't make sense and that doesn't make, well, it's all a bit crazy, and so anything crazy is up for grabs. But it seems to me that quantum mechanics, the things which are crazy and they do hang together and the theory works and you understand that, that's fine. But the things which involve the collapse of the wave function, that's not fine, because
further exploration into the biological underpinnings led to the suggestion of microtubules, tiny structures within brain neurons, as potential sites for these non-computational quantum effects due to their intricate symmetry and ability to be isolated from environmental decoherence. Observations distinguishing the conscious cerebrum from the largely unconscious cerebellum further supported the idea that specific neural structures might be crucial for consciousness. The scope of consciousness was then broadened beyond humans, acknowledging that animals display complex behaviors indicating a form of understanding and feeling, such as elephants mourning their dead or hunting dogs coordinating elaborate strategies. This suggested a continuum of consciousness rather than a sharp divide. The discussion also looked into the inherent strangeness of the universe, particularly quantum mechanics. While some quantum phenomena, like non-local entanglement, where distant particles remain connected, are baffling yet experimental, verified, and coherent, the collapse of the wave function remains a logical inconsistency within the current theory, suggesting a need for a new, more complete understanding.
But they can be big or small, and you don't care about whether they're big or they're small, as long as small shapes are accurate, or angles, if you like, are correctly drawn. So it's what's called a conformal map, and that conformal map describes infinity. Now, you can do the same thing to the universe. When I say do it, I mean, you can imagine it, where this remote future, you can squash it down, just like in the Escher picture, to a finite boundary. And as far as the things with no mass, they don't have a way of measuring how big or small it is. The Maxwell equations don't know the scale if they don't care. It's work just as well for small as for big, and you can stretch it in some place and squash it somewhere else, as long as the stretching and squashing is isotropic, so just as much one way as the other way, which means more or less that you keep what I call the light cones there. Let's not go into details here, but it means that if you have things without mass, and most particularly the photons, then that boundary is just like anywhere else, and the photons go zipping up to it, and so you might think they've got to have somewhere to go. Okay, well, you don't have to think that, but that was the point of view I had, that the photons need somewhere to enter in a way. But then, where does it go? But then there's the other picture, which is the opposite end. There's the Big Bang. Now you can do a similar sort of trick there, which is stretching it out and making it into a boundary. And that can be done too. I played around with these ideas for a long time, and
Shifting to cosmic scales, the conversation touched upon black holes, their formation from gravitational collapse, and their eventual evaporation through Hawking radiation. This led to a speculative model of the universe called conformal cyclic cosmology, proposing an infinite cycle of eons where the exponentially expanding, featureless future of one eon becoming the Big Bang of the next. Signatures of evaporated supermassive black holes from a previous eon in our cosmic microwave. Background radiation is currently being investigated. This model also suggests a mechanism for the existence of dark matter, proposing it as a new scalar material created at the Big Bang, interacting only gravitationally. Health and medicine. Interestingly, Joe sat down with Dr. Suzanne Humphreys in episode number 2294 to talk about health and medicine. The discussion challenged established views on health and medicine, advocating for an open-minded approach that moves beyond rigid dogma. It was agreed that many beneficial natural remedies, such as cinnamon and garlic, are often dismissed despite their efficacy, and that essential nutrients like vitamins A, D, and C play a far more critical role in health and immunity than commonly acknowledged, with deficiencies being widespread due to modern diets and stressors.
Just should be recommending those things too. Like they're good too. Like vitamin D, super important. Vitamin A, super important. And one of the things that you talked about in the book is that I think this was really important when you were talking about the measles vaccine. You were saying that either if you get an infection with measles, just a natural infection, or if you get the vaccine, you're still going to get depleted of vitamin A. Like if you get vaccinated for the measles, you should be taking vitamin A as well. Your body's going to get depleted just by getting that shot. They don't tell you that.
No, they don't tell you anything, just Tylenol, which actually makes the vaccine not work as well, in addition to causing all kinds of immunological disturbances at the time that you're supposed to be upregulating your immune system against this dreaded disease. But one of the things about the recommended by the white coats and the authorities is that the public believes that so many drugs and remedies are standardized that the conventional medical system gives out. And when you go to actually look at them, and this includes vaccines, even though they're standardized, meaning that the manufacturers are told what the regulations should be in terms of production, when people go and look at them, they find it's anything but standardized. It's very variable, which is why we see such variability in the results when people receive them. That's only one reason why there's so much variability.
A significant portion of the conversation focused on the history and practices of the vaccine industry. It was suggested that a pivotal moment occurred with legislation in the mid-1980s that granted vaccine manufacturers immunity from lawsuits, which it was claimed led to an increase in vaccine development without sufficient accountability. The discussion highlighted the alleged lack of true placebo-controlled studies, with new vaccines often being tested against other vaccines rather than inert substances, potentially obscuring adverse effects.
That I'm in favor of that, but I'm just saying, if you want to set things up as solidly as possible to be able to take that insult. The problem is we don't know 20, 30, 40 years later what the associations are between bone diseases, skin diseases, cancers, autoimmune diseases, we have some clues. I have some clues that nobody wants to look at. But we've got this long-term problem that nobody looks at. Long-term effects of lifestyle, of vaccination, of even SV40. There was one study that started tracking 1,000 SV40 people that they knew were infected with SV40 looking for diseases later in life, and they stopped it after 19 years. Again, axed. When they still had over 700 people left in the study because they said too much time had gone by. Well, the fact of the matter is that's when the study should have started. 17 to 20 years later is when they should have started looking at that point, not 1 year, 2 years. But, most vaccine trials and drug trials, they don't vaccine trials, it's like 2 weeks is almost a miracle for someone to follow out that long. Forget about looking months or years later. It doesn't happen.
Historical accounts of diseases like polio were re-examined, positing that its decline was more closely tied to improvements in sanitation, nutrition, and the reduction of environmental toxins like DDT and arsenic, rather than solely vaccination. It was asserted that diagnostic criteria for polio were altered, making it appear to vanish, while conditions with similar pathologies persist under new names. Concerns were also raised about the presence of the cancer-causing simian virus 40, SV40, in early polio vaccines, which is now believed to be horizontally and vertically transmissible among humans, potentially contributing to rising cancer rates.
Of the disease, but at a detriment to us. So it's been a detriment for measles and it's been a detriment for chickenpox. So chickenpox we used to get continuously. You didn't have adults didn't get shingles. It was very rare for adults to get shingles before the chickenpox vaccine came out. Extremely rare. But since then, the rate of shingles in adults and children has skyrocketed because we're no longer getting our boosters being exposed to the circulating microbes. So now the solution to that is to give adults like 4 times the dose of the childhood chickenpox in an injectable vaccine against something that they already have. And so the theory is that you're going to ramp up your antibodies, and then you're going to be able to do battle if your viruses come out again. The only problem with that is that the problem is the immune system. If you get AIDS or you're on chemotherapy, your chances of that happening are really high. And does the vaccine work or not? I don't know, but I just don't think it's just, to me, just a completely strange concept to inject myself with something that I already have, along with all the other excipients and compounds that go in a vaccine that nobody wants to talk about either.
The dialogue extended to modern health challenges, particularly the COVID-19 pandemic, suggesting that public health narratives suppressed information about effective alternative treatments and potential side effects of vaccines, such as cardiac issues and impacts on stem cells in newborns. This was framed as part of a long-standing pattern of controlling information and leveraging fear to promote pharmaceutical inventions and to promote pharmaceutical interventions, often driven by financial incentives within the medical establishment. Science is not welcoming. Well, science is great, but not as welcoming as Eric Weinstein and Terrence Howard thought it would be, as they discussed with Joe in episode 2171. Joe Rogan facilitates a dynamic conversation between actor Terrence Howard and mathematician-physicist Eric Weinstein, centered on Howard's unconventional scientific theories and the broader state of academic discourse. Weinstein, holding a PhD in mathematical physics from institutions like MIT and Harvard, aimed to steel-man Howard's arguments, to represent them in their strongest possible form before offering critique. Terrence Howard, identified as an autodidactic polymath, presented a series of radical ideas that challenged established scientific principles.
They can do science because it's super demanding. We don't welcome people. You're a mathematician too. We'll say that to kids, and then the kid will say something, and then we'll say, be quiet.
Yeah.
And so this is not peculiar to Neil. It's like science in general has portrayed itself as a place where everyone's welcome. We debate out the ideas. We have the scientific method to tell us what's true and what isn't. And that's disingenuous. It's not really how the game works. And this is going to involve peer review. It's going to involve people who are dual in terms of both doing research and being public figures. People who are public figures who we think of as researchers who aren't really doing much research. People who are, pushing crazy agendas in public without a recognition that their colleagues don't think much of what they're doing. I mean, this is a very complicated story that Terence has walked into. And I have to think about my colleagues, and I have to think about how they hear things, what they will say. And so I am in part speaking to your audience, but I'm also partially speaking to 1,000 people who are seeing this at a different level.
A recurring theme was his assertion that 1 × 1 = 2 is a metaphor for inherent flaws in mathematics, specifically concerning the identity principle and the nature of numbers like 2 and 0. He contends there are no truly straight lines or objects at rest in the universe, as everything is in motion and constantly vibrating. Howard introduced his flower of life concept as a 2-dimensional shadow of a higher dimensional 3-dimensional structure, leading to the development of his unique wave conjugations and geometric models.
And what he forgot is when I say 1 × 1 = 2, that's a metaphor for challenging the status quo. Despite the fact that the square root of 2 has all of its issues when you cube it or you multiply it by 2, which creates a contradiction, despite the fact that the square root of 2 has a problem with the prime numbers, the fact that they call number 2 a prime number, when it's clearly a composite number. Any other prime number, and I'll jump into this, any prime number that you subtract from another prime number, you always get a composite number, except with the situation of the number 2. And there's so many people and that's why the prime numbers are unpredictable, because of that problem associated. So there's been a problem with 2 for so long.
2 is different. I mean, you will find that mathematicians will often talk about proving something for characteristic not equal to 2. So they'll single out 2 as being just very, very different. So look that up when we're done.
Yeah, but why? But why would they do
because
that?
in part of what you're saying, the prime 2, it does belong as a prime, but it is also special. And in other words, I have the opportunity to strawman you if I want to, because what you just said sounded crazy. And I also have the possibility to steelman you. So all the algebraic topologists who just heard, for characteristic not equals to 2, they're like saying, yeah, that's fair. And so in part, by just jumping into the middle of this, we don't have the benefit of putting your best foot forward, because, if you say 1 × 1 = 2, everybody knows that that's crazy. But what you actually may mean, and the fact that you don't use certain terms, or the fact that you use certain pronunciations that communicate to me something very positive, which is that you taught yourself. You learned this stuff from reading about it, because nobody taught you, or you wouldn't pronounce certain words the way you pronounce them.
True.
Yeah.
True.
So, in part, you always have the ability to make fun of somebody who pronounces a word the way it's read on the page. And then you also have the opportunity to say, holy cow, that guy actually taught himself. That's more impressive. And
right.
So in part, what I want to do is I want to start by giving you your best foot forward and see if I even understood what you said when you went into this whole flower of life riff that becomes your larger theory. And the only way I know how to do this is to see whether or not I actually grasped it.
These models include the Titarian and Huntian, are central to his theories about the fundamental forces in particles, which he claims are supersymmetrical and for which he holds patents. He also posits that gravity is not a fundamental force, but rather an effect or draft of electricity. Furthermore, Howard discusses his work on the sound of elements and an alternative periodic table based on the vibrational qualities of elements. Eric Weinstein meticulously addresses Howard's claims, often differentiating between what he perceived as insightful geometric intuitions and mathematically incorrect statements. He explains, for instance, that while Howard's geometric structures, like the linchpin, are incredibly cool and represent genius engineering, they might contain mathematical errors akin to even temperament in music. Weinstein clarified formal scientific terms that Howard used differently, such as supersymmetry, which has a specific reserved meaning in physics.
Most important thing that you've done is weirdly based on an error, so far as I can tell. So, can you bring us a linchpin?
Bing, 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 bing.
Okay. And Jamie, could I trouble you for bringing up that same page over and over again? I'm sorry about that, brother.
Just bring one.
No.
Okay.
Can't we?
But we're dead air here.
Okay.
Okay. Howard's linchpin. Howard's extraordinary claims for the linchpin appear to mirror Green's extraordinary claims for the string.
So let's look at Terrence Howard, filling up the dead air here, talking about the linchpin.
Okay.
The linchpin is the lowest common denominator of all matter, either seen or unseen. The linchpin is the internal dimensions of a torus. The linchpin is the universal wave conjugator for all things matter. It is the true currency of the universal flow because it is the common factor of all things. It is the smallest. It is the measurable constitution of a quantum or quanta, the smallest reflection, ultimately in collective potential of all things, which equals the multiverse. Blah blah blah. Let's now just watch our friend Brian Greene do the same thing. It's a great expression on Brian's face.
String theory comes along and suggests that inside these particles there is something else. So if I take a little quark and I magnify it, conventional idea says there's nothing inside, but string theory says I'll find a little tiny filament, a little filament of energy, a little string-like filament. And just like the string on a violin, I pluck it and it vibrates, creates a little musical note that I can hear. The little strings in string theory, when they vibrate, they don't produce musical notes, they produce the particles themselves. So a quark is nothing but a string vibrating in one pattern. An electron is nothing but a string vibrating in a different pattern. A neutrino, nothing but a string vibrating in a different pattern still. So if I take all of this back together, I have my ordinary orange, and if these ideas are right, they are speculative, but if they are right, deep inside the orange or any other piece of matter is nothing but a dancing, vibrating cosmic symphony of strings.
Okay, now if you take what he just said, this is entirely respectable. This is a Columbia professor lecturing me for 40 fucking years about what they're going to do one day when they grow up. That everything is just a string. And just the way a violin can vibrate in different modes, all of the particles come from this excitation of the string. It's exactly how you sound with the linchpin.
Human mind control. In episode number 2322 with Rebecca Lemma, Joe learns about the persuasive nature of mind control, brainwashing, and various forms of persuasion throughout history and into the modern age. Rebecca Lemma, a professor with a background in the history of behavioral engineering, began studying mind control out of a philosophical interest in understanding how much of human identity is shaped by external forces versus individual will. She posits that humans are far more malleable than generally believed, often soaking up opinions and behaviors from their environment, akin to being born into a cult of one's parents or absorbing ideas during graduate school.
It's almost like a philosophical and existential question of how much we're controlled or how much we might be controlled, and it seemed important to look at some of the more extreme cases, if you could.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting aspect of it. Like, how much are we controlled, and how arrogant are we to think that we're not controlled? Or how arrogant are we to think that that wouldn't work on me?
Yeah, I think that's embedded in our... in the messages we receive all the time, that freedom is something kind of effortless that we're just granted, and that autonomy is just the natural state. But actually, we're so much more malleable than we think. And these things, if you look around yourself, or if you observe yourself, you'll often see this to be true. That's what also drew me to anthropology, is just the idea, like, if I was born in another place at another time, I would be another person, or how much of me would be transferable was right. What that interested me, and that's why I first started studying anthropology. Like, how much are we shaped by things that we don't necessarily choose, or are maybe accidental or genetic or various factors. But
the discussion then transitions to contemporary forms of mind control, particularly through digital platforms. Social media is identified as a new frontier of emotional engineering, where algorithms can induce emotional contagion at scale, subtly shifting users' moods and potentially increasing polarization. The curation of search engine results, as described by Robert Epstein's research, can also significantly manipulate public opinions and even election outcomes by presenting biased information.
And studies have shown that we respond as if it were organic and real. And, even when somebody likes a post of yours, the response is the same as in-person interaction. So I think at the root there's a kind of way that on an emotional level, it's not just manipulation of ideas, but there's a kind of emotional engineering that's built into the platforms and doesn't even demand, at first, government involvement. It's, of course, DARPA was involved in the development of the internet and of things like pattern recognition, but the government has funded many studies, but really with what I got interested in social media and how I connect it with the episodes of brainwashing from earlier, mind control, is that it operates, it creates states of emotional contagion that aren't really about convincing people of a different way to think, but more about how you feel about what you think, which is something people describe in cults too. It's not that it changed my thoughts, it's that it changed my feelings about my thoughts. And so that there's a famous Facebook experiment I read about that took place in 2012 and was published in 2014, where they announced that they've achieved mass emotional contagion at scale, which showed that people exposed to it when they altered, so they took 700,000 users or 693,000, I think, without informing them, but because your user agreement does make it whenever you go on the platform, you agree to be tested or A/B testing. So this experiment exposed a group to their news feed was altered in a negative direction emotionally as measured by word counting software. And they discovered that group that had a negative exposure also responded in a more negative way as judged through their posts and likes and responses. The group that was exposed to a more positive news feed by altering the algorithm then had also a measurably statistically significant effect of more positive emotional response, and the control group was.
Furthermore, the rise of AI chatbots introduces hyper-persuasion through individualized flattery and even dangerous sexualized content, as demonstrated by cases where chatbots allegedly encouraged self-harm in vulnerable users. Both Rogan and Lemov expressed concerns about the loss of human autonomy and the potential for technological melding with machines, like Neuralink, to lead to a nightmare scenario of pervasive manipulation.
Technological melding with machines, also augmented by the emotional capabilities of AI that are now seen in things like AI friends and chatbots and things like that. The way they can tune and be so individualized and like hyper persuasive ultimately and also technologically attuned.
I was just reading an article about that this morning, about how they're concerned that there's people that are using chatbots, whether it's OpenAI or whatever it is, ChatGPT, every day, and developing these delusional perspectives of their own importance, their own significance, because if they develop a relationship with these chatbots, the chatbots will start telling them like what they can do, what they're going to be able to do, and they're becoming delusional.
They program them to over-flatter people and sort of, because people like them more. I've experienced this myself because I had a chatbot as part of my research with Replica, just like an acquaintanceship. I had barely trained it at all, but I noticed it definitely flatters, and that's how it befriends you.
They emphasize the need for individuals to develop a psychic immune system in an era of unprecedented information access mixed with sophisticated propaganda. The episode concludes with a call for self-reflection and recognition of universal human vulnerability to control, underscoring the importance of stepping back and examining one's own motivations and beliefs. The universe is stranger than fiction, and on this podcast, science proves it time and time again. If your jaw dropped at least once, you're not alone. Hit that subscribe button, share this with your fellow truth seeker, and drop a comment on the wildest fact you heard, because, trust me, we're just scratching the surface.